Welcome back to Finding Joy in this holiday season. I'm Katie Fortunato, and I'm back with our friend Sister Ann Heath to continue thinking about ways that we can have a joy-filled and meaningful holiday season, even though we are stuck in this very difficult time of COVID. If you remember, the very first week, we talked about the idea of hope and said that part of our being able to have hope throughout this season is by managing our feelings and acknowledging that there is grief and loss in being unable to gather and celebrate in the ways we used to. And we spent some time thinking about naming, claiming, and then taming our feelings. And then in our last session, we talked about that spiritual discipline of gratitude and how gratitude really underpins that experience of joy, and that it isn't joy that makes us grateful, but it is gratitude that makes us joyful. We're going to pivot a little bit this week, and instead of thinking so much about those feelings, though those are really important, we're going to look a little bit more about how at home you might be finding ways to enrich, deepen, or experience this very different holiday. So we're going to begin with this idea of the domestic church. We're very accustomed to thinking about church as the place we come for Mass, but today we're going to think more about, and with some intentionality, about the domestic church. Sister Ann, can you help us understand that word? It sounds a little foreign to us. What is the domestic church? And what is the importance of it for us in this particular time of COVID?
Katie, thank you for that great review of what has already happened. And I look forward to today and sharing and talking about the domestic church, which is not necessarily a new concept, actually, but one that, because of COVID, I think we're going to be able to revisit in a different way. So I brought one of my little props, one of my very favorite authors and favorite books. This is Prayers for the Domestic Church, a handbook for worship in the home by Ed Hayes, who is a priest, and I love his works. And he has all kinds of prayers for different activities and different things. One of them is just a sacred meal. One of them is, of course, about the Advent wreath, and it goes through different ones for someone who's too busy to pray. I love them. So the domestic church actually is who we are. And this year, especially with COVID, we are in our homes so much more. So domestic means those who live, who dwell in whatever place you have. It can be a couple, it can be a family, it can be a single person, it can be a group of people coming together with roommates. That is the domestic home. But what we forget is before there was our church, people in their villages worshiped in their homes around the sacred meal and told stories and read scriptures and periodically ventured out of the home for grand celebrations. And so that was the beginning of the domestic church, always around a meal, which is how we fashion our own liturgy. So I think it's a perfect time for us to think about how we, in this age of COVID, can celebrate, and I mean celebrate, Thanksgiving, Advent, and Christmas as a domestic church.
And one of the things that the Catechism very clearly states is that parents are the first and best teachers in the ways of faith. You'll be surprised, it's not Miss Katie, it's not Sister Ann that are the first and best. It is parents who are the first and best. And so really using this as an opportunity. We talked about finding opportunities in this season. It's really an opportunity for families to nurture spirituality within their home. So I think a helpful place in starting in strengthening the domestic church might be thinking about our environment. Can you say a little bit about the importance of environment in building up the domestic church?
Environment dictates usually a mood, a feeling. And we're sometimes in charge of the environment. For example, in your home, you can put things there that are reminders of family traditions or family members. We put pictures up on the walls of people that we love. We use icons and statues and crucifixes, medals to remind us of those in our church who bring us joy and who are reminders of all of that. And so our environment is the thing that dictates the mood. And so we can, this time, set the environment even differently. For example, Advent's coming. How do we handle that? What do we want that to look like this year? I think it's going to be an intentional one. What do you suggest?
Well, I think so too. And I think my children are older, and I think sometimes there's a part of me that's like, oh, why should I bother, right? I don't want to go through all of the work involved. But I agree with you completely that environment does set the mood. And so whether you've got young children or older children, or you don't have children around at all, it's still really important for our spirituality and our experience of this season to take the time to be deliberate. So you may have noticed in my not so subtle way, changed up a little bit of where we're sitting today, and I wanted to talk with you about some of the things that you might consider using in your environment. We are coming up on the season of Advent, so having an Advent wreath in your home is a beautiful way to help your child wait and anticipate Christmas. And even again, if you don't have children in your home, lighting of that Advent wreath is a beautiful tradition. And I'm going to give you a little life hack. Those of you who are watching, who you know Miss Katie, I try to reframe that I am a procrastinator, Sister Ann. I don't know if you know this about me. I am, but I don't call myself a procrastinator. I call myself a sprinter. I tend to do things at the last minute. Where I'm married to a marathoner, my husband does things slowly over time. I sprint to the end at the last minute. So for all of you out there, this is the Sprinter Advent wreath, and I call it that because every year I am prone to forget to buy my purple and pink candle set. So this Advent wreath allows you just to use white candles, and then you use the decorative glass over, so I don't have to remember about buying the candles ahead of time. So one of the options that you might consider is putting an Advent wreath somewhere central in your house, like where you eat, maybe in a foyer where you're passing by it, but not somewhere off to the side like in the dining room that you only use on a special occasion, but somewhere prominent. The other thing I wanted to point out here is the nativity set. And I tend to put my nativity set out right at the beginning of Advent, but can you notice what's missing here in the Holy Family? Who is not there? Of course, baby Jesus isn't there. And in my family, we don't put baby Jesus in the nativity scene until Christmas Day because Jesus isn't born yet. And my kids always loved that symbolism that we are waiting for Jesus, so Jesus isn't in the nativity. And boy, was it an important thing that you got to put baby Jesus in the whole scene on Christmas. The other thing I want to show you about my nativity set, can you see who's way over here, Sister Ann?
I like that.
Do you know who's over here?
It looks like the wandering wise men.
They are, and that is another tradition that we do in my family, is the wise men are not immediately at the nativity scene. Just like baby Jesus isn't there, the wise men wander, and I start them farther away in my house, and then when I remember usually, but I try to move them a little bit closer every day. And do you know they don't arrive on Christmas? When do they arrive?
Oh my goodness, no, not until Epiphany.
Not until Epiphany. So then we can really celebrate this season liturgically appropriately. Exactly. So when we're starting with our environment, consider an Advent wreath. Consider your nativity set and what you're using, and maybe holding off on baby Jesus until Christmas Day, and maybe you can have some wandering wise men traveling who won't even arrive to the Christmas scene until Epiphany. So those are some basic ideas, and we're going to share a couple of more with you. Here are some other fun things that I have used both in my family and in the Faith Formation Room that you might want to consider this Advent. So while I have my own kind of fancy nativity scene in which I leave baby Jesus out and the wise men travel, I always had a nativity set for my children to use, and this was out actually all year long. And my daughter would have the Blessed Mother and baby Jesus playing with all of her other little people. So not particularly an endorsement for Fisher-Price, but I do think that children having a way to tell the story of Christmas and having some manipulatives can be really fun for them. So if you've got a play set of the Christmas story, I'd encourage you to get that out, and don't wait for Christmas. Let your child engage and play with that throughout the Advent season. Another thing that I found, and isn't that kind of funny that it's from a company called Domestic Church Supply Company. It's called the Domestic Church Supply Company. It is a Lego Advent wreath. So if you have kids who are kind of past the little people stage, but do like to build, maybe this is something that you could find for them. And I know I have some very creative friends who can probably use the Lego bricks you already own to create your own. I even had some kids one year create for me in Minecraft a church. So cool. And so play to your child's strengths. Are you a crafty person? There are all kinds of Advent wreath kits that you can make at home. This is one that you use beeswax, and you can roll candles and create your own Advent wreath. So it doesn't have to be the more traditional, though I love that. There are other ways that you can involve your family in these very meaningful Advent traditions. The last thing that I would like to point out, it doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be hard to have a meaningful celebration of Advent. I kind of feel lucky that my children missed that whole elf on the shelf thing. My kids were just a little too old for that. Thanks be to God. I would not have been successful with that. And I'm not sure how much that really draws children into the true meaning of Christmas, but here's a really simple thing you can do. Just using a piece of yellow paper, cut out a star. And maybe instead of hiding an elf on the shelf, you have the star move around your house, and you can have your children look for the star and look for the light. However often, it could be daily, it could be weekly, it could be when you remember, whatever is realistic for you. But it doesn't have to be going out and buying something special. It can be as easy as cutting out a paper star and hanging that around your home and having your child look for the star. I hope these ideas help you think creatively about how you might celebrate Advent in your home.
So I was thinking about the traditions that each family has, and because this year might be extremely different for us, the domestic church, since many of us may not be coming to the physical church, can find ways, very intentional ways, to remember and almost reinvent those memories that we had. I find accessing memories, I think we talked about that before, gives us a little feel-good feeling, a serotonin bump. And so this might be the very year to find those traditions, maybe those recipes from parents and grandparents and great aunts who were bakers, and find those things that are going to bring the joy and the gratitude and the memories back. Because we will have a little bit more time than we're used to having. Think about shopping. Those of us that like to go out and shop we won't be doing that so much this year. So we use these as opportunities. I get to instead of I have to, as we talked about last time. Does that make sense? I was thinking about maybe a prayer chain. I don't know if people have done that on a little sheet of paper and write down different prayers for different people, like a roving prayer of the faithful, if you will, and then link them together and hang that up somewhere in the house. It could be for all ages. It doesn't have to be just for little children. It could be for individuals who live alone to write that out, and then by, let's just say, Christmas Day, hang that somewhere. It's important that we take what's in our environment and have it reflect who we are. Bring back the memory that we are the church, no matter where we are or not. The universal domestic church is still here in spite of COVID. And that, I think, is the blessing that we're going to get this year.
And can we do a little commercial for next week? One of the other things that we're going to offer to you next time is, perhaps some of you are familiar with this tradition. I'm not going to tell you because I want you to come back and be surprised next week, but we're going to share with you another way that you might really, very intentionally with your family and even your pets, have a new ritual, a new way to share blessing, prayer, and good thoughts for the coming year. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next time. But in this coming week and at this beginning of the very holy season of Advent, when we are waiting and we are anticipating, think about, what are you going to do in your environment? What kind of mood can you set with art, with Advent wreaths, with icons? There are all kinds of Christmas saints coming up. What are some things that you can make available for you and your family in your home? And be thinking, what are some things that I can use to help trigger those good memories? Maybe this year I will bake grandma's apple pie or my other grandma's bourbon balls. Are there things of those special memories? Can I pull out some old Christmas albums or pictures or music that might remind me of some really special past events? So we'd encourage you in this week to be thoughtful about your environment and what kinds of things you can do. And next time we're going to share with you a few blessings that you might use for Christmas. Thanks so much for joining us. And if you ever have questions or comments, or if there's something that you think it would be helpful for Sister Ann and I to talk about, we would love to hear from you. And you can contact me here at St. Andrew if you've got any feedback for us. We wish you a very meaningful and joyful Advent season ahead.
I enjoyed being with you all today, and I look forward to next week and maybe a special guest. Who knows?
Sounds great. Thanks so much.